Hello, everyone. We are going to get started in just a couple of minutes, waiting for a few more people to join. All right, I think we can get started now. Hello, everyone. My name is Sunali Sagar, and I'm the Product Marketing Manager at OpenText. And I support the Encase Forensic and Tableau line of products. And I will be your host for today's webinar. Firstly, I would like to thank you for taking the time to join us for this webinar. We released the Tableau Forensic Imager TX1 2.0 version late last year, and are really excited to host this webinar for you. And to present today, we have with us Jeff Hedlesky, Forensic Evangelist at OpenText. I will let Jeff introduce himself in just a moment here. I will quickly go through the agenda first. All right. So in today's webinar, valuable new capabilities of the TX1 Forensic Imager. You will look forward to learn new capabilities of TX1 2.0, how the TX1 encryption detection can save time during an investigation, how to create forensic images of Apple computers with the TX1, and how to tips and practical use cases for using the TX1 Logical Imaging feature during an investigation. And we'll address your questions at the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. All right, let's jump into some of the housekeeping items here. So throughout the webinar, please submit your questions through the chat window, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. And at the bottom of your screen, there are a few helpful widgets that I'd like to point out. We have the resources widget, where you can download the latest TX1 material. Also, if you run into any technical issues during the webinar, there is a support widget for troubleshooting. We will also be recording this webinar and we'll be posting it to our website, and we'll be also sending this via the email to all attendees. So in case you have run into any issues and have missed part of the webinar, you can always go back and watch it at your own convenience. We'd also like to say that you take the time to submit the survey at the conclusion of the webinar. And this allows us to gather product and presenter feedback, which helps us improve our future webinars. So please, completing this survey will also qualify you to win a free Encase training course. Lastly, if you have any questions following our webinar, please feel free to contact us at the link here. All right, so that was the housekeeping. I'd like to introduce Jeff. Again, I'm really lucky today to be joined by our extremely knowledgeable forensic expert, Jeff Hedlesky. Jeff is a forensic evangelist at OpenText and has been with OpenText guidance for over 7 years, and has worked in and around digital forensics since 2004. Jeff, would you like to take over and introduce yourself furthermore?
Thanks, Sunali. Love to. Howdy, folks. I really am Jeff Hedlesky, OpenText's forensic evangelist. It's a great job that includes letting me tell the world about our wonderful products that all of you help us design and build through the conversations we get to have. And from all the wonderful and sometimes tricky questions and feedback you've given us over the past 15 years. We thank you for that, and we hope you'll never stop. We're going to focus today's chat on the TX1, but I would be remiss if I didn't put in at least one small shameless plug for the full line of Tableau hardware and software solutions. We really do offer the most comprehensive selection of digital forensic hardware, which is used by more investigators in more countries than any other company's products. And again, all I can say is thank you for trusting us to allow our tools to be used in your investigations. So just kind of a recap to get us all in sync. The last time I talked to you about the TX1, I covered the fundamentals of our flagship forensic imager, and we tried to cover the wide variety of digital media that TX1 supports. We talked about the real-world, high-performance, simultaneous forensic imaging it provides, both with locally connected media and over the network. We talked about TX1's amazing user interface, which makes all this power and speed accessible, easy to learn, and easy to incorporate in your organization's or agency's forensic workflow. And I'm happy to say we've built on all three of those pillars over the last year, and I thought it might be time to give you an update on where TX1 is today in early 2019. If you're new to TX1, I hope you'll find today's presentation to be informative, maybe even a little compelling. If you're already a field-hardened user of TX1, I hope you'll hear at least one thing in today's presentation that'll make you say, I didn't know my TX1 could do that. And now, it's probably a good time for a brief infomercial for the TX1's best friend, TFU, which, as many as you know, stands for Tableau Firmware Update. It's a utility. You can download it from our website anytime, and you can use it to check or update the firmware of any and every bridge, duplicator, and forensic imager we've ever sold. One utility for all the products. Through TFU, we can regularly provide TX1 with feature, performance, and compatibility updates. So, update early and update often. And the best part, those updates are always free of charge for the life of your Tableau product. So, speaking of updates, when we chatted last, we were just putting the final touches on TX1's 1.2 firmware. Since then, over the course of the last year, we've followed that release up with 3 more releases, adding features, speed, and language support. The 2.0 firmware update was our biggest product update ever in the history of the Tableau hardware team, with roughly 30 enhancements. And since 2.0, we've also released 2.1 recently, and even as I speak, QA is working on a patch update called 2.1.1, which you'll be seeing very, very soon. We're constantly finding ways to make TX1 better, and in fact, we already have 2.2 in active development, and it's scheduled for an April release. So lots of work making your TX1 better every quarter. So let's talk about what's new for TX1. First, media support. It's not integral within the TX1 itself, but TX1 will see some new media adapters released early this year for U.2 media, M.2 SATA, and mSATA digital media, and there'll also be a new Apple SSD form factor adapter coming. We've also recently announced TX1 support for PCIe cloning, formatting, encryption, and wiping using the Tableau T7U forensic PCIe bridge in concert with TX1. Second, in line with our goal to make the TX1's user interface unmatched for ease of use for our customers all around the globe, we've significantly improved our non-English language options. TX1 now provides fully localized functionality in the German, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Russian, Turkish, and Chinese languages, including a localized virtual keyboard for user inputs. It's wonderful, or as the French would say, magnifique. Third, we've been hard at work enhancing our support for CIFS shares over TX1's crazy fast 10 gigabit Ethernet network connection. This past summer, we were pleased to update TX1's SMB support to include support for versions 1.0, 2.0, 2.1, and 3.0. And we're also now supporting logical imaging from CIFS shares, and I'll talk more about logical imaging a little later. So now let's get into some of the really cool new features, starting with encryption detection. Sometimes, when you're working on a case, you want to avoid imaging encrypted volumes, as the nature of that case means you'll have neither the time nor the resource to engage in brute force decryption. Or maybe you're working the case on scene and you don't have time to waste acquiring terabytes of data which won't be immediately usable for triage and carving. In those cases, it would be handy to know before you spend an hour or more imaging that 2 terabyte hard drive that hard drive has been encrypted. Likewise, and again, depending on the nature of your case, you may encounter a whole disk encrypted drive in an investigation that should not include such things, which makes that encrypted drive the most interesting piece of digital evidence in that stack of media. Either way, it's good to know that now TX1 will detect and report on, both for source and destination volumes, the presence of BitLocker, BitLocker to Go, FileVault 2, Symantec PGP Disk, Lux, which is popular within the Linux community, and Bestcrypt. We plan to add to this list in future firmware updates, so if you have a favorite, or a least favorite if you're working an investigation with encrypted volumes, please give us your input. Taking advantage of this new feature is easy, as it requires no additional user effort. We'll give you an encrypted drive informational message in the appropriate drive tile summary view, as seen in the sources and destination drive lists, accessed through the bottom of TX1's main screen, or when you're adding sources or destinations during TX1 job setup. We'll also show you this information in the header section of the Drive Details screen. Finally, the TX1's forensic log will always contain any detected encryption types. So next, let's talk about Apple Mac forensics. There are two ways to do forensics on a Mac. You can remove the storage media and image it like any other IDE, SATA, or PCIe device, or you can connect to the Mac's media without removing it through the magic of target disk mode, or as the cool kids say, TDM. We've been supporting TDM on the Mac for a long time, starting with the older FireWire-equipped Macs through our T9 forensic FireWire bridge back in 2009, and all the way up to the present day with TX1's FireWire 800 and USB 3 source ports. With the addition of Apple's FireWire to Thunderbolt 2 adapter, Macs with Thunderbolt but not FireWire ports can also be easily TDM imaged as well. And I should point out that while TX1 can physically image from either HFS Plus or APFS formatted Mac storage media, it can only browse and logically image HFS Plus formatted volumes today. This is true for both Mac media, which has been physically removed from the Mac and connected to TX1 through a media adapter, and for Mac media, which is mounted and imaged through TDM. We're still working on teaching TX1 how to mount and parse an APFS volumes directory structure. So stay tuned for future updates on that. So Apple released Macs supporting USB-C, or sporting USB-C and Thunderbolt 3 ports, and they threw the forensic community a bit of a curveball. Well, at OpenText, we know how to hit curveballs, so we've been working hard to ensure that TX1 continues to offer reliable, high-performance TDM operations, even with these new USB-C devices. With our 2.0 firmware update, we provided initial support for TDM over USB-C Thunderbolt 3 Macs, and with the recent 2.1 firmware release, even Macs with Fusion drives can now be TDM imaged on TX1, with each physical piece of media, the SSD and the hard drive, showing up as a separate source volume in TX1's UI, ready for imaging. Okay? Now, this webinar is not meant to be a training course on Mac forensics, but we have learned a few things along the way that we would like to share with you. One of the curveballs Apple threw at us regarding USB-C based TDM operations is that these new Macs will not boot into target disk mode unless they believe they are connected to another USB-C Mac running a compatible Mac operating system and connected by the right cable. You simply will not get a TDM connection if those conditions aren't met. TX1 can spoof the "yes, I'm a Mac, running an acceptable OS" portion, but we can't fake the right cable. And the right cable is going to be one that is physically a USB 3 Type A connector on the TX1 side, a USB Type-C connector on the target or source Mac side, and one which supports the full USB 3 5 gigabit per second super speed standard. You can't use a charging cable. You got to use the full spec. So that's kind of a mouthful. Let's make it simple. There are a lot of cables out there which look like they might work, but only a few which really do work. Belkin makes one. And no, I'm not getting paid in Bitcoin by Belkin for saying that. Amazon also offers one in their Basics line. Best Buy in the U.S. sells the black version of the Belkin cable, and Apple sells the white version in their stores. For the Amazon cable, just put in some combination of Amazon Basics, USB Type-C, USB-A, male, 3.1, Gen 2 cable, and you should see a 3-foot cable pop up for around $10 US. There may be other cables which work, but those are two that we've tested internally and found to work reliably. Internationally, your mileage may vary, but you'll still need to start with the right cable if you're going to get USB-C TDM to work using any software or hardware tool. To close out our discussion of Mac OS forensics, a technical note: for those TX1 owners out there who make DMG images of APFS formatted volumes and then verify those images via their forensic Macs, there is a potential for block size confusion between the block size assumption that your forensic Mac will make when it's trying to read the DMG, which is a 512 byte sector size assumption, And the source max APFS partition, which creates a block size of 4,096 bytes that Apple now uses for APFS under High Sierra. It's a mismatch. Most APFS Macs have a GPT partition table with the APS volume on one of those partitions. The size and contents of the GPT headers is dependent on block size. So if the Forensic Workstation's OS is confused on the block size, then it won't find the partitions. No partitions, no file system. So what to do? Well, for now, we found that mounting these APFS image files on your Forensic Mac from the command line with a command to force 4096 byte block size does the trick. If this is something that you might find yourself doing, I know it's a little arcane, but if this is something that you might do because of your workflows, drop us an email, contact our support team, and we'll be happy to send you the workflow, some examples, the command line scripts that we know have worked. We'll hook you up. Eventually, we suspect that macOS will get better at what assumptions it makes about the block size of DMG images. But until that changes, we found a solid solution that works. And we just wanted to share that with you so that you don't get frustrated unnecessarily. All right, so now let's talk about logical imaging. When we set out to add logical imaging to TX1, we knew we couldn't just make it powerful, which we did, or fast, which we did. We also had to make it easy, intuitive, and flexible enough for the wide variety of use cases our global community of customers would demand. We know that with drive capacities now exceeding 12 terabytes per volume, it's time for a forensic imager which allows the investigator to acquire only what they need and nothing they don't. Logical imaging can save an investigator valuable time by focusing on specific files or file types of interest rather than acquiring the entire physical drive. And if you don't have to acquire the entire drive, then you don't have to process all of that acquired data in your forensic tool. We hope it's EnCase, which again saves you even more time. So let's say you're investigating a 2 terabyte drive with 180 gigabytes of active files and folders. Well, just make a logical image of that drive and leave out all the slack space and deleted files. Now you're capturing less than 200 gigabytes to your destination media instead of 2 terabytes, which means you're consuming far less destination media and the associated processing and carving time for less data. It's the reason why, almost 20 years ago, EnCase Forensic introduced the industry standard L01 logical file format, also sometimes called the LEF or LEF for logical evidence file format. In 2011, we introduced the updated and improved LX01 standard format, and that's the logical imaging file format we've selected for TX1. TX1's logical imaging function understands the underlying structure of the recognized file system, so it doesn't just acquire the desired source file data, but, at the investigator's option, the metadata as well associated with those files, folders, and archives. A logical imaging job can be configured to create both an LX01 logical evidence file and the metadata lists, which are presented in an industry standard CSV format, or you can acquire only the LX01 or only the metadata. In fact, there's even an option to collect only the files of interest, but to collect all the metadata from all of the source files, including the ones which themselves were not individually collected. Acquiring all the source file metadata allows the investigative team to have a record of what data was and was not acquired during that logical imaging operation. As I said earlier, flexibility was one of our top design goals. So, reducing the workload from 2 terabytes down to 180 gigabytes of evidence to sift through sounds great. But what if you want to go further in your focused investigation? What if you only want document files, or files created and modified in the last 90 days, or every file on the drive larger than 100 megabytes? What if you're only interested in user directory files, or Windows directory files, or here's one, what if you want all the active files and folders on the drive except for the Windows directory files? Maybe you have a warrant to examine the John Smith user directory, but not any of the other user directories. It's all easy with TX1's new logical imaging engine and interface. In making these kinds of targeted logical imaging operations, TX1 allows both direct selection of the files of interest to acquire and rules-based searches to target specific files based on file type or other criteria. For example, we said earlier that maybe you just wanted the document files on a drive. What does that really mean? What happens under the hood on TX1 to give you all the document files? Well, documents are a file type, just like archives, databases, emails, multimedia, and pictures are file types. They're all searchable by TX1's new logical imaging engine. Each file type has a predefined list of file extensions known to be associated with that type of file. In the case of documents, TX1 searches through well over 100 different file types to ensure you find the documents you're looking for. And don't forget about direct selection for files of interest. It's as simple as browsing through the directory structure of the source volume and checking the box next to each file or folder. You can combine almost any combination of direct selection and rule-based searches to make your TX1 logical imaging session as simple or as complex as you need. Now, I don't want to turn this short webinar into a TX1 logical imaging training film. There's actually a lot of good step-by-step examples of all of this in the logical imaging section of the TX1 user guide, which can be downloaded anytime you like from our website. But I think it's useful to discuss one very cool aspect of how we've designed the UI on TX1's logical imaging engine when targeted searches are performed. I call it our all-or-nothing approach. And you can think of it like this. When you're starting a search, you have to start from somewhere and then search from that beginning point. If I hand you a big pink evidence bag filled with flash drives, and I tell you I want the one that's dark green with a crack in the case and contains the Mary White Windows user directory, you're going to have to dig through and triage all the green cracked flash drives in that bag to find the one I want. Likewise, if I tell you I want a list of Mary White's known accomplices, and you don't know anything about Mary White, you're going to start with nothing, and you're going to set up a series of actions, forensic examinations of her laptop, phone, tablet, maybe interview family members, neighbors, coworkers, to create that list that I want. In the same way, TX1 gives you the flexibility to begin your search by choosing whether to start with all the files and exclude the ones that you know you don't want, leaving only the files you might want, or to begin your search with nothing and set up one or more search parameters to include only the files you might want. It's simple, elegant, and flexible, which is just the way we like it, and we think you'll like it too. We spoke earlier of searching for documents and how we could also search for other file types, such as databases or emails or pictures, etc. And we also spoke of ways to search beyond just file types. Let's dig into these options just a little bit. Now, you can search by path, and that sounds boring, but this is where you can actually perform a character string search by file name or by the full path, directory, or file name. So if you're looking for a file called Frisky Kittens, just type in FRISKY space KITTENS in the path search parameter box and let TX1 go looking for those kittens. You can also search by folder. This search parameter restricts your search to only a specific folder or to groups of folders defined by their system usage. User folders, operating system folders, even non-operating system folders, so that you can skip all that Windows OS stuff you don't care about on this particular case. Our engineering team have carefully curated predefined lists of folders known to be used as user folders or operating system folders, and will continue to prune those lists as operating system versions evolve. You can also browse the source file system contents for a custom folder of your own creation. You can search by file size. This one is easy to understand, but in addition to looking for only smaller or only larger files, you can also search within a file size range. Say, just find me the files that are between 100 megabytes and 500 megabytes. If you think you're looking for a file around 300 megabytes in size, but you're not quite sure. And finally, you can search by date. Like file size, you can search for older files, newer files, or files that fit within a date range. And after TX1 has completed a logical imaging operation, all the search parameter data used for that job is saved in the forensic log. That way, you'll always know how you found what you found, and you can easily reproduce the search parameters if you or someone else needs to find it again. TX1 can logically image locally connected media, CIFS shares, or iSCSI volumes. They may mount differently, but once a volume is mounted as an available source drive, the file selection and search parameter process is the same. What is a little bit different from what you may be used to when performing a physical imaging job is that with logical imaging, we're acting on individual files and folders, and those file structures live within partitions or file systems on the physical media. When you have a hard drive, your physical imaging options are limited to what kind of image container, EO1, EX01, DMG, DD, you wish to create, because you're imaging at the drive level. With logical imaging, you have to tell TX1 which file system on that drive you wish to examine. If it's just one partition or file system on the media, then your source drive pane on the TX1 UI will look the same, physical or logical. But if there are multiple TX1 readable file systems on the drive, then you will be asked to choose which file system you wish to logically image on the source drive pane. Another difference between physical and logical imaging you may notice has to do with device configuration overlay, or DCO management. Unlike a physical duplication job, the option to shelve a source drive DCO, removing it and then reapplying it at the end of the job, is not available in logical imaging. The existence of a DCO will be obvious. You'll see warnings in multiple locations, but the DCO will need to be permanently removed using the manual HPA DCO disable media utility on TX1 before gaining access to all portions of the source media. And finally, there is a difference in error handling between physical and logical imaging. With physical imaging, multiple retries are possible when read errors are encountered. With logical imaging, retries are not allowed because file-level read errors typically persist across multiple read attempts. Because of this, for logical imaging jobs, the only error handling setting decision is whether to continue with the job and skip the unreadable files, or to stop the job upon the first error encountered. Now, alongside these differences, there are many more similarities between EX01 physical imaging and LX01 logical imaging. So if you're already a pro at driving your TX1, you'll find logical imaging will have a familiar feel, from the look of the logical imaging job stepper to the details you apply within the various settings. Our goal, as I said at the beginning of this chat today, was to give you all this additional power while still making it easy to learn and easy to use in your daily workflow. We'd love to have the opportunity to sit down with each one of you and tell you more about TX1's amazing capabilities. But for now, I'll hand the microphone back to Sunali. Thanks for giving us some of your precious time today. We all look forward to your questions and welcome your feedback and suggestions. Our roadmap for the TX1 is long, but we've always got room for one more customer-driven feature request. Back to you, Sunali.
Thank you, Jeff, for the great presentation. I'm sure our audience found it interesting and informative. And now I'd like to open it up for the Q&A. We received a lot of good questions, so let's just jump right into them and address as many as we can. And if we don't get to your questions, we definitely apologize, and we'll follow up after the webinar. And as mentioned earlier, feel free to post your questions on our website as well. All right, the first question I have here is regarding encryption detection. Does TX1 support McAfee Safe Boot encryption? And today we also have Jason Bailey, Director of Product Management, who will help answer any questions that we have.
Hi, thanks, Sunali. I'll answer that first question there. Jeff and I will do our best to tag team answers here. So the first question, do we support McAfee Safe Boot encryption? No, we do not at this time. You'll notice a theme in my answers. I may say not yet. I can't promise forward-looking things, but I'll guarantee you there are a lot of things that are on our roadmap, and McAfee is something we're looking into. But please be assured that if there is something that's important to you, whether we answer your question or not today, either through the Q&A or directly by email or any of your other contacts. Let us know, and we'll make sure we do our best to get it in the future release. Short answer, no, we don't support McAfee right now.
And if I could jump on to the end of Jason's answer to you, there's two things that will drive additions to our supported encryption type list. One will be your feedback, but the second will be the encryption knowledge pool that already exists within our EnCase development team. As many of you know who drive EnCase as your forensic tool, it's very good at detecting and actually facilitating the decryption of many, many different corporate encryption regimes, including McAfee. And so we have a great wealth of knowledge amongst those guys on those encryption types. We'll be leveraging that as well as we look to build out that list of supported encryption. But certainly, number one driver, your feedback.
Okay, great. Jumping on to the next question. Is there a way to lock the TX1 screen with a pin for long imaging jobs when the device has to be left unattended?
So these are my favorite questions. This is Jason again. When we do have a feature that we've already worked on, and it will be coming out imminently in the next release. So I can reveal a little bit. But yeah, I'm pleased to say that in 2.2, coming out due out at the beginning of April, we do have a feature to lock the TX1 screen with a temporary pin. And it'll give you a little bit of information about how long the TX1 has been locked. But exactly to do what you're asking there. So look forward to that feature coming up in 2.2 and contact us directly if you'd like to know more about exactly how it's going to work or would like to beta test that.
All right. Next question. Will the TX1 support cloning from a disk image to hard drive? Currently, only clones from hard drive to hard drive are supported.
This is Jason again. I think what maybe the cloning means, cloning from a disk image to a hard drive, correct me if I'm wrong, the person who originally answered it or asked this question, is essentially like restoring, what we call restore. So the TX1 does currently allow a user to restore an image from certain image types to a clone drive. However, it is only if that image was created with the TX1. We are looking at improving that in the future. But at this point, you can do that, again, only if the image was created with the TX1.
All right. Next question here is that if you could say something about network abilities and would like to know if the TX1 can be set up to send the duplication to a network storage like a NAS.
Sure. Absolutely. Jeff, you want to answer that?
That's an easy one. I'll answer that one because that one we've actually used as a leverage point to sell some TX1s into some rather large agencies. The cool thing about TX1's UI is it doesn't really make a big deal about how many different places you want to put the source media that you're imaging. If you want to write it out to two different hard drives, one's a SATA and one's a USB stick, that's fine. And likewise, if you have source media that you're imaging and you'd like to write it out to fixed media and a network location, that's fine. If you want to write it to multiple network locations, that's fine. If you want one of those network locations to get an EO1 and the other one to get a DD, that's fine. It's super flexible. So almost any combination of fixed media and network-based destination is possible with TX1. We do give you an upper limit of only 4 destinations per source media, but we think that most folks can fall within that pretty happily.
Great. Thank you, Jeff and Jason. Next question. Can you use a hash list or MFS for logical collections?
At this time, you cannot load a hash list to use for logical collections for search criteria, like you can with some other discovery tools or EnCase. But it is something we are looking into.
Okay, thank you. Next question is on logical imaging. So files created or modified in the last 90 days. What date time metadata determines such? File system metadata or times dates inside the file?
So the logic used for, and I know we just covered a summary of the different options that you can use for dates and times. There's a lot more in the user guide, and again, if you have further questions, please contact us directly. But the exciting thing is there's a lot more we did not show today that's available there. So to answer this question, what is used? It is metadata. So metadata from the file that we gather is used for the MAC attributes, whether it was modified, access created within the last, let's say you say 90 days, or like we mentioned, I think, or if we didn't, you can look for maybe within a certain week where you know that your case took place. Or if, like we said, in the last 90 days, you want to just verify that anything has been touched or modified or created on that drive in the last 90 or 30 days to make sure that there's any potential, relevant evidence on there, and can specify that as well. So we don't allow you to specify which specific attribute, but it is, any of those. We use all of them and look at the most recent.
All right. Thanks, Jason. Another question here is that, does the file type include signature analysis? If not, would it include, for example, john.doc.old as a Word doc?
Good question. And so the TX1 in this version does not yet support signature analysis. We released it first just with the file type analysis, and as this question is leading to answer, or to ask, excuse me, what we're doing with our file type, and we explain this in the UI a little bit, but also in the user guide. File types, of course, are just extensions. So if you have a Word doc that doesn't end in doc or docx, but like the question asks john.doc.old, currently, as the TX1 is set up, if you filter for Word files using our file type or using your own extension mechanism, custom, it will not find that. You have to know to look for .old, and of course you're not going to want to do that. So once we do add signature analysis, we will be able to grab those files as well.
All right, thank you. Next question. Does the TX1 have the ability to image when the source computer has Apple T2 security chip on board? So
we've recently discovered that no, the TX1 and our USB write blockers or forensic bridges do not properly mount the volumes that are presented from an Apple computer with the T2 secure enclave chip installed. So thank you, Apple. I love Apple in some ways, but it also keeps us employed and reasons to come out with new updates to differentiate ourselves. So we, at this point in time, and those of you who are familiar with this, Apple released some computers. I think they started, I don't know if it's all, but many computers in 2018 with the T2 secure chip. And Apple, of course, changed the way in which it presents those volumes and the protocol and communication needed to mount them. So I'll tell you that no, it does not work right now, but that's something we certainly are looking at. And stay tuned for further development there.
Great, thanks, Jason. The next one we have is, can a template be created for a logical image that can be used for several cases?
Not today in the current release. So right now you can create a search criteria or a template, but unfortunately you can't save it yet. However, I can say, fortunately the next release, 2.2, the one coming, we're targeting for beginning of April, does give you the ability to save, to modify, to create, and name and manage all of your searches, your search criteria on the TX1. So you can use them across multiple uses of the TX1. And it'll save, of course, after power cycles.
All right, thank you. When searching for files, do you search by file extension or file signature?
Good question. So it's kind of a different way to ask the question. It was asked earlier. Currently, we only search by file extension, and that's what we mean by file type. We have a bunch of preloaded ones, similar but different list of the ones that are available in any case. You can also specify your own list if you want to use, but we do not support we do not search for signatures at this time, but it is something we will be looking into in the future.
All right, thank you. Is the encryption line in log files already available in current versions of images? And if not, can we get a sample of what it will look like?
Yes. I think if you're asking about it may have gone by pretty quickly if you didn't see it, but in one of the slides, we show an example of what the log file does look like when it tells you if there is encryption enabled. In fact, I can go back here and show it on the screen. So this is available as of version 2.0. So if you have TX1 2.0, you will see and have access to the encryption support. And we also do speak a little bit more about it in the user guide as well. So I'm just pushing to the screen right now a very brief example or a short snippet of what it does look like. So you have there's two lines. We have Tableau encrypted, and that's our own Tableau type encryption we've been doing for a while. It's based on VeraCrypt. Our TD2U duplicator and TX1 support that. We treat that separately. And then the next line down below, you'll see whole disk encryption detected, and it'll be like none detected, I believe, and then it'll tell you if there is detected, it'll tell you what it was. So basic, but important information that may be quite valuable later in your chain of evidence. I hope that answers your question. If not, please let us know.
All right, thanks, Jason. Next one, are EX01 and LX01 the only options for output? Can you select E01/L01?
So that's kind of a big question with a lot of moving parts. When we talk about logical imaging, our logical imaging output format choice was LX01, and a lot of time was spent looking through the various options, and we'd be delighted to have a cup of coffee or a beer with you and walk you through that process. But at the end of all the fighting, LX01 really looked like, for a lot of reasons, the best container for us to do our logical imaging output to. When we talk about physical imaging, though, that's very different. Physical imaging, we output E01, EX01, DD, DMG, all sorts of different options there. But for logical, until there's a compelling reason otherwise, and you're welcome to give us that compelling reason, we're going to be using LX01.
Great, thank you, Jeff. So Jason, Jeff, any other questions that you see here? I think we covered quite a few questions here. Any other that stand out to you and you want to address?
There is one. I know there's a bunch I'd like to ask answer some more, but you know, in nature of time, we'll have to do that offline. But rest assured, as mentioned before, we'll be sure to get a response to each and every one of you if your question was not answered today. The one I wanted to mention is that if the cable for connecting the Mac to the TX1 over USB-C, USB-C to USB-A, if it could be listed for searching. And absolutely, actually, I believe in our user guide in the section for USB-C, we list that cable, and also in the release notes. But we'll make sure that we answer that directly to you and or everybody by email in the Q&A as well. Jeff, do you have anything else? Otherwise, I think we're
I find myself smiling. There's a question here: is there a TX2 in the works? It was probably asked by one of our hardware competitors with pencil in hand, waiting to find out what our what our plans are. No, I jest. There's always a next generation product in the works, and that next generation product is driven by the roadmap for the current generation product. And we weren't kidding when we said that the roadmap for TX1 is long. If any of you out there bought a TX1 at launch because it was awesome and it did everything you thought you needed, we thank you. But if you look at the features that we've given you since you bought it, we've just about given you another whole product with just firmware updates. And that's the amazingly powerful story behind TX1's architecture. We can teach it a lot of new tricks. And so is there a TX2 in the works? There is. And it looks like the 1.2 drop for TX1, which was pretty big, the 2.0 drop, which was really big, and a few of the drops that are even coming this year, which again add massive more power. Where a TX2 comes along is when we start collecting roadmap items that we agree internally are really important and something that we'd like to add that for whatever reason we cannot incorporate into the TX1's physical architecture. And that's when the drumbeat will really kick up loudly for a TX2. But until then, if you want a TX2, get a TX1 and run TFU regularly and keep adding features to it. And it'll be Christmas 3 or 4 times a year.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Any other questions you'd like to address? We have 1 last minute. All right. I would like to thank you all for attending the webinar. Thank you, Jeff and Jason, for such an educational webinar on TX1. I hope it was informative and interesting for all our attendees. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to check our website, and we're happy to follow up. Thank you, and thanks again for joining us today.